Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Aramoana Massacre. Viewer discretion is advised. Aramoana is a little seaside town which is located, I guess, about 27 kilometers or 17 miles north of Dunedin, which is in New Zealand. Typically, it was a quiet, peaceful little community, very small community. As a matter of fact, I guess one of the more recent census, population numbers have it at like 250 or so people. It's just typically a place where, people can normally just relax and it's quiet. But on one particular day, many years ago, it was not so quiet. The largest mass shooting in New Zealand's history before the Christchurch shootings would occur. It was 13 November 1990 at approximately 7:30 p.m. A resident of Aramoana named David Gray would confront a next-door neighbor of his. His neighbor was Gary Holden, and the confrontation was over the fact that Gary's daughters were lingering onto David's yard. Something I guess he just didn't like, and so this caused an argument, a fight. David Gray then just casually walks into his home. He comes back outside with a semi-automatic rifle, and he just fires several shots into Mr. Holden. Mr. Holden falls to the ground. Mr. Gray walks right over him, points the gun directly at his head, and shoots him right in his head. The three young girls who were playing outside, two of them being Gary Holden's daughters, they ran into the Holden house. David then just walks basically into the house and he shoots all three girls. One of the girls, Chiquita, would end up surviving. The other two did not survive. He had used a second gun, a semi-automatic sporting rifle. He had multiple guns. He had several. After he shot the three girls, he then started to fire in the Holden house, and it quickly caught ablaze. As vehicles basically were passing by, David just began to shoot wildly at them. As people tried to approach the now burning house to see if they could help, David began shooting at those people as well, and he shot at any vehicle that got close. This included a 26-year-old woman named Vanessa Percy who had seen all of this happening, and she began to run down the street away from all of this, and David just shot her in the back several times, killing her. David then saw three young children, different children than before, and he began to shoot at them as well. This included Leo and Dion Percy. Both were killed. The two boys' sister was shot, but she managed to survive. Their father, Ross Percy, was also shot during this. And so the majority of the Percy family, just innocent bystanders who were just there, the family was essentially wiped out. He then next saw a 41-year-old named Lucky Tully, who he just shot and killed, just was there, and so they were shot. David then just walks into the house of another neighbor. This house belonged to a man named Tim Jameson. He basically, I think, was trying to just hide or something, but David just shot and killed him. And then there was another individual inside, an elderly man named Vic Crimp. David shot and killed him too. Then outside there is a man named James Dixon who is out there looking for his dog. I guess his dog got away. David saw this and just shot the man. Now at this point, 111, which is their emergency number there in New Zealand, they had been called, and so they were already on their way. All of this has basically happened in the span of, I'm not exactly sure how long this all happened, but it was a short time frame. The first officer to respond was a man named Stuart Guthrie. Essentially, once he arrived and David noticed him, David began to fire towards him and missing. David then was able to, I guess, flee back into another house. And Mr. Guthrie had been able to see exactly what David was doing, so he was relaying the information to fellow officers, I guess, over the radio. And, Guthrie is yelling at him to come out, to surrender, to stop this. And there's this mini pursuit kind of between the officer and David that doesn't really last a super long time. And it got to a point where Guthrie saw David and pointed his gun and fired a warning shot towards David. And David then said, don't shoot, almost as if he was surrendering. And so, Guthrie believed he was surrendering. It looked authentic, but it turns out it wasn't, because then David lifted his gun and fired several shots towards Guthrie, hitting him multiple times, including once through his forehead. And the officer was killed instantly. So at this point, the officers who were now there from Dunedin basically began to cordon off this entire town, and they blocked the only way in and out of Aramoana, at least by road. And so they were essentially in the process of surrounding this town. What would basically occur is that for the next 20 some odd hours, there would be this kind of like standoff almost, while they're trying to safely either apprehend David Gray or kill him. This would consist of police essentially going from house to house slowly and carefully and searching for him while he is still in hiding. They would at one point, they go back to his house where he actually lives, and they threw like a thing of tear gas through a window and trying to either smoke him out or anything. And once they are able to enter his home, they discover he's not actually in his house. But this is a long and slow process as they're trying to find him, because this psychopath madman is just here somewhere, but he's managing to hide pretty well. And that is when they come across what they call cribs, basically like a small, summer home type thing. And they see a broken window, and then they see movement inside this house, and they realize that David Gray is in here. And so what begins as a 2-minute shootout. They're both exchanging fire, police and David firing at each other. David, to my understanding, doesn't actually hit anyone. They had like helicopters flying above, essentially making sure that if he were to escape this house, they would be able to see where he is and they'd be able to track his movements. And then on November 14th, 1990, at about 5:50 p.m., so again, we're almost a full day later after all of this started, David Gray comes running out of this crib, and he is firing from the hip towards the officers, and he is basically screaming at them to shoot him. He says, quote, "Kill me, fucking kill me, you bastards." And that is when officers who were ordered to basically, this was a shoot to kill situation. They were not there to fire warning shots or at that point even arrest him. It was just because he clearly wasn't going to just surrender and be arrested. And so they had to shoot him, and they ended up shooting him several times, and he would be pronounced dead. David Malcolm Gray, who was born in 1956, at the time of this story, was a 33-year-old unemployed resident of this quiet little town. Growing up, he was always just described as this quiet, unassuming kid. Got decent grades, not great grades. He did okay. He did seem to be kind of like a loner, though, throughout his adolescence. His dad died in 1978, and then when his mom died in 1985, that seemed to really, really hit him pretty hard. By that time, it became apparent to people who knew him that he had anger issues, he had some mental health concerns, but like nothing that really ever jumped out at anyone, I guess. But in the months leading up to this attack, he had started to basically distance himself from any of the friends he had, which was very few. And then in the days before the attack, people had noticed that his behavior was becoming very erratic. He had gone to a bank. There was like this very small, tiny, like couple dollar charge done to his account, and he absolutely flipped out on the bank employee about it. He had gone to, like a bakery or a coffee shop where he ordered something that was supposed to be hot, but it ended up being really cold, and he freaked out on the employees there. And they had him escorted out of the building, where he said, "I'm coming back. I will get you. I will blow you away," is what he said to him. And then I think it was like the day or so before this shooting, he had gone into the local Elo's gun shop, where he intended to purchase more guns that he was going to pick up the following week, but that would never happen. But he already had guns at home. As it turns out, he had several. And so really the motive behind this seems to be kind of unclear. But I mean, what sparked it was this argument he had with his neighbor, and clearly he was building up to this outburst, which would turn out to be much more than an outburst, but something was building up, obviously, and he just, I guess, was pushed over the edge, and that was it. In the end, 14 people died that day. 13 victims and 1 the perpetrator. 11-year-old Rewa Bryson, 62-year-old Simon Christopher Cole, 71-year-old Victor Vic Crimp, 45-year-old James Dixon, 41-year-old Sergeant Stuart Guthrie, 38-year-old Gary Holden, 11-year-old Jasmine Holden, 69-year-old Tim Jameson, 42-year-old Ross Percy, 26-year-old Vanessa Percy, 6-year-old Dion Percy, 41-year-old Aleki Tali, and 6-year-old Leo Wilson. 3 more people were seriously wounded and shot, but would recover, which included another officer or detective. Several people after this incident would be awarded bravery awards. This included police personnel, but also, citizens who were there. There were police accommodations given, and within a couple of days or so, they ended up doing a controlled burn and burning down David Gray's house. And apparently there were residences of Aramoana who just sat there and watched his house burn to the ground, smiling and laughing. Eventually, this beautiful little memorial was built for the victims of the attack. Their names are engraved on the memorial. Eventually, this would lead to books being written about it. There were film and television shows that did recreations or were a scripted recreation of this event, including one called Out of the Blue. And like I said earlier, this was the deadliest mass shooting that essentially ever occurred in New Zealand until the Christchurch mosque shootings, which I know I covered over on my TikTok page, which you can find somewhere in one of my compilation videos here. This spurned an immediate gun control debate, and they put in immediate fixes. By 1992, they had already put in amendments to the firearm legislation, tightening gun control, which included, being able to purchase military-style or, semi-automatic weapons. And then they didn't have really any mass shootings. Not really. Not until the Christchurch mass shooting, which was like decades later. But this was just one of those things. This was just one of those things where a man who was clearly unwell mentally, perhaps, obviously wasn't being treated for anything, and really no one saw the signs, at least not until it was far too late, and he was allowed to own just so many. He had several, military style weapons in his house and that he used that day. I mean, he had at least 6 or 7 of them, I think. I saw a picture of them, which I probably can't show on here, but he had many, and he was able to purchase them without any issues. But then they fixed it, and then there wasn't one of these again for decades. So 13 people died, including children, all because one man got mad. That is ultimately what's so scary about the human race, is that ultimately you don't know anyone. You don't know a stranger. You don't know even your neighbors. You don't know them that well. And it's just kind of scary what could happen with people who are strangers. And it's scary. But, at least David Gray was, from that day moving forward, never able to hurt another soul again. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. Hope you found it interesting. And please subscribe to the channel if you're into true crime. I tell 3 true crime stories a week here on YouTube. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. So you can follow me over there. The link is in the link tree below. I have about 3 million followers over there. And I'm not feeling super well today, a little sick, so I'm not going to do my normal weird closing. I'm just going to say goodbye, and I will see you guys for the next video. All right.